The Battle of Okinawa, codenamed Operation Iceberg, was a series of battles fought in the Japanese Ryukyu Islands, centered on the island of Okinawa, and included the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War during World War II. The 1st of April 1945 invasion of Okinawa itself. The 82-day-long battle lasted from the 1st of April until the 22nd of June 1945. After a long campaign of island hopping, the Allies were approaching Japan, and planned to use Okinawa, a large island only 340 miles away from mainland Japan, as a base for air operations for the planned invasion of Honshu. The Japanese mainland.Four divisions of the U.S. 10th Army and 2 Marine divisions fought on the island, supported by naval, amphibious, and tactical air forces. The battle has been referred to as the Typhoon of Steel in English, and Tetsu no Ama Tetsu no Bofu in Japanese. The nicknames refer to the ferocity of the fighting, the intensity of Japanese kamikaze attacks, and the sheer numbers of Allied ships and armored vehicles that assaulted the island. The battle was one of the bloodiest in the Pacific, with an estimated total of over 82,000 direct casualties on both sides, 14,009 Allied deaths and 77,166 Japanese soldiers, excluding those who died from their injuries later. No figures are given for supporting Japanese forces killed. Allied grave registration forces counted 110,071 dead bodies. 42,000 to 150,000 local civilians were killed, committed suicide or went missing. A significant proportion of the estimated pre-war 300,000 local population. The severity of the campaign made the United States unwilling to invade the Japanese mainland, and was one of the motivating factors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which for many years academics have regarded as the reason for Japan's surrender. More recent scholarship debates why Japan surrendered, attributing the surrender to reasons including the atomic bombings, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, the bombing of Tokyo, and Japan's depleted resources. Order of battle. Allied Central Pacific Task Forces under Admiral Raymond Spruance, covering forces and special groups directly under Spruance. Fast Carrier Force under Vice Admiral Mark Hamisha with 88 ships. British Carrier Force under Vice Admiral Sir Bernard Rawlings with 4 carriers, 2 battleships, 5 cruisers, 14 destroyers and fleet train. Joint Expeditionary Force under Vice Admiral Richmond K. Turner. Amphibious Support Force under Rear Admiral William H. P. Bland. TG-52.1 18 escort carriers with 450 aircraft. SL Escort Carrier Group 4 escort carriers with Marine Aircraft Group 31 and 33. Mine Flotilla. Underwater Demolition Flotilla 10 100 men UDT aboard. Destroyer escorts 170 fire support landing craft. Western Islands Attack Group under Rear Admiral Ingolfen Killand with 77th Infantry Division, 17 attack and attack cargo transporters, 56 LSDs and support vessels. Northern Attack Force under Rear Admiral Lawrence F. Rafe Snyder, Commander Amphibious Group 4, aboard US Panamint with 3rd Amphibious Corps on 40+ attack and attack cargo transporters, 67 LSDs and support vessels. Southern Attack Force under Rear Admiral John L. Hall with 24th Corps Demonstration Group with 2nd Marine Division, Gunfire and Covering Support Group under Rear Admiral Morton L. Deyo with 10 old battleships, 11 cruisers and 30 destroyers. Expeditionary Troops under Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr. with 10th Army. TF-56 was the largest force within TF-50 and was built around the 10th Army. The Army had two corps under its command: 3rd Amphibious Corps, consisting of 1st and 6th Marine Divisions, and 24th Corps, consisting of the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions. The 2nd Marine Division was an afloat reserve, and 10th Army also controlled the 27th Infantry Division, earmarked as a garrison, and 77th Infantry Divisions. In all, the Army had over 102,000 soldiers, over 88,000 Marines and 18,000 Navy personnel. At the start of Battle of Okinawa, 10th Army had 182,821 men under its command. It was planned that General Buckner would report to Turner until the amphibious phase was completed, after which he would report directly to Spruance. Although Allied land forces were entirely composed of U.S. units, the British Pacific Fleet provided about 1/4 of Allied naval air power. It comprised a force which included 50 warships, of which 17 were aircraft carriers. But while the British armoured flight decks meant that fewer planes could be carried in a single aircraft carrier, they were more resistant to kamikaze strikes. Although all the aircraft carriers were provided by Britain, the carrier group was a combined British Commonwealth fleet with British, Canadian, New Zealand and Australian ships and personnel. The mission was to neutralize Japanese airfields in the Sakishima Islands and provide air cover against Japanese kamikaze attacks. Most of the air-to-air fighters and the small dive bombers and strike aircraft were U.S. Navy carrier-based airplanes. The Japanese land campaign was conducted by the 67,000-strong regular 32nd Army and some 9,000 Imperial Japanese Navy troops at Oroku Naval Base, supported by 39,000 drafted local Ryukyuan people. The Japanese had used kamikaze tactics since the Battle of Leyte Gulf, but for the first time, they became a major part of the defense. Between the American landing on the 1st of April and the 25th of May, 7 major kamikaze attacks were attempted, involving more than 1,500 planes. The 32nd Army initially consisted of the 9th, 24th, and 62nd Divisions, and the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade. The 9th Division was moved to Taiwan prior to the invasion, resulting in shuffling of Japanese defensive plans. Primary resistance was to be led in the south by Lt. General Mitsuru Ushijima, his Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Izumi Ucho, and his Chief of Operations, Colonel Hiromichi Yafara. Yafara advocated a defensive strategy, whilst Cho advocated an offensive one. In the north, Colonel Takehide Udo was in command. The IJN troops were led by Rear Admiral Minoru Ota. They expected the Americans to land 6 to 10 divisions against the Japanese garrison of 2.5 divisions. The staff calculated that superior quality and numbers of weapons gave each U.S. division 5 or 6 times the firepower of a Japanese division. To this would be added the Americans' abundant naval and air firepower. Military use of children. In Okinawa Island, middle school boys were organized into frontline service Teketsu Kinite, while Haimura students were organized into a nursing unit. Teketsu Kinite. The Japanese Imperial Army mobilized 1,780 middle school boys aged 14 to 17 years into frontline service. They were named Teketsu Kinite. This mobilization was conducted by the ordinance of the Ministry of Army, not by law. The ordinances mobilized the student for a volunteer soldier for form's sake. However, in reality, the military authorities ordered schools to force almost all students to volunteer for soldiers. Sometimes they counterfeited the necessary documents of students, and about half of Tekatsukinite were killed, such as in suicide attacks against a tank with bombs and in guerrilla operations. After losing in the Battle of Okinawa in June 1945, the Japanese government enacted new laws in preparation for the decisive battles in the mainlands. They were the laws that made it possible boys aged 15 or older and girls aged 17 or older to be drafted into frontline service. Naval battle. The United States Navy's Task Force 58 deployed to the east of Okinawa with a picket group of from 6 to 8 destroyers, kept 13 carriers on duty from the 23rd of March to the 27th of April and a smaller number thereafter, until the 27th of April. From 14 to 18 escort carriers were in the area at all times, and until the 20th of April British Task Force 57, with 4 large and 6 escort carriers, remained off the Sakishima Islands to protect the southern flank. The protracted length of the campaign under stress-filled conditions forced Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to take the unprecedented step of relieving the principal naval commanders to rest and recuperate. Following the practice of changing the fleet designation with the change of commanders, U.S. naval forces began the campaign as the U.S. Fifth Fleet under ADM Raymond Spruance, but ended it as the Third Fleet under ADM William Halsey. Japanese air opposition had been relatively light during the first few days after the landings. However, on the 6th of April the expected air reaction began with an attack by 400 planes from Kyushu. Periodic heavy air attacks continued through April. During the period 26 March to 30 April 20 American ships were sunk and 157 damaged by enemy action. For their part, the Japanese had lost up to the 30th of April more than 1,100 planes in the battle to Allied naval forces alone. Between the 6th of April and the 22nd of June, the Japanese flew 1,465 kamikaze aircraft in large-scale attacks from Kyushu, 185 individual kamikaze sorties from Kyushu, and 250 individual kamikaze sorties from Formosa. When U.S. intelligence estimated 89 planes on Formosa, the Japanese had approximately 700, dismantled or well camouflaged and dispersed into scattered villages and towns. The U.S. Fifth Air Force disputed Navy claims of kamikaze coming from Formosa. The ships lost were smaller vessels, particularly the destroyers of the radar pickets, as well as destroyer escorts and landing ships. While no major Allied warships were lost, several fleet carriers were severely damaged. Land-based Shinyo-class suicide motorboats were also used in the Japanese suicide attacks. Although General Ushijima have disbanded the majority of the suicide boat battalions prior to the battle due to expected low efficiency in face of superior enemy, the boat crews were reformed to the 3 additional infantry battalions. Operation Tengo was the attempted attack by a strike force of 10 Japanese surface vessels, led by the super battleship Yamato and commanded by Admiral Seiichi Ito. This small task force had been ordered to fight through enemy naval forces, then beach themselves and fight from shore using the guns as coastal artillery and crewmen as naval infantry. The Tengo force was spotted by submarines shortly after it left the Japanese home waters, and was intercepted by U.S. carrier aircraft. Under attack from more than 300 aircraft over a 2-hour span, the world's largest battleship sank on the 7th of April 1945 after a one-sided battle, long before she could reach Okinawa. U.S. torpedo bombers were instructed to aim for only one side to prevent effective counterflooding by the battleship's crew, and hitting preferably the bow astern, where armor was believed to be the thinnest. If Yamato's screening forced the light cruiser Yahagi, and 4 of the 8 destroyers were also sunk. In all, the Imperial Japanese Navy lost some 3,700 sailors, including Admiral Ito, at the low cost of just 10 U.S. aircraft and 12 airmen. British Pacific Fleet. The British Pacific Fleet, taking part as Task Force 57, was assigned the task of neutralizing the Japanese airfields in the Sakishima Islands, which it did successfully from 26 March to 10 April. On the 10th of April, its attention was shifted to airfields on northern Formosa. The force withdrew to San Pedro Bay on the 23rd of April. On the 1st of May, the British Pacific Fleet returned to action, subduing the airfields as before, this time with naval bombardment as well as aircraft. Several kamikaze attacks caused significant damage, but since the British used armored flight decks on their aircraft carriers, they only experienced a brief interruption to the force's objective. Land battle. The land battle took place over about 81 days beginning on the 1st of April 1945. The first Americans ashore were soldiers of the 77th Infantry Division, who landed in the Kerama Islands, 15 miles west of Okinawa on the 26th of March. Subsidiary landings followed, and the Kerama group was secured over the next 5 days. In these preliminary operations, the 77th Infantry Division suffered 27 dead and 81 wounded, while Japanese dead and captured numbered over 650. The operation provided a protected anchorage for the fleet and eliminated the threat from suicide boats. On the 31st of March, Marines of the Fleet Marine Force Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion landed without opposition on Kaishima, 4 islets just 8 miles west of the Okinawan capital of Naha. 155 mm long Tom-S went ashore on the islets to cover operations on Okinawa, northern Okinawa, where the main landing was made by 24th Corps and 3rd Amphibious Corps on the Hagushi beaches on the western coast of Okinawa on L-Day, the 1st of April, which was both Easter Sunday and April Fool's Day in 1945. The 2nd Marine Division conducted a demonstration off the Minatoga beaches on the southeastern coast to confuse the Japanese about American intentions and delay movement of reserves from there. The 10th Army swept across the south-central part of the island with relative ease by World War II standards, capturing the Kadena and the Yamaton air bases within hours of the landing. In light of the weak opposition, General Buckner decided to proceed immediately with Phase 2 of his plan, the seizure of northern Okinawa. The 6th Marine Division headed up the Ishikawa Isthmus and by the 7th of April had sealed off the Motobu Peninsula. 6 days later, on the 13th of April, the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marine Regiment reached Hedo Point at the northernmost tip of the island. By this point, the bulk of the Japanese forces in the north was cornered on the Motobu Peninsula. Here, the terrain was mountainous and wooded, with the Japanese defenses concentrated on Yadake, a twisted mass of rocky ridges and ravines on the center of the peninsula. There was heavy fighting before the Marines finally cleared Yadake on the 18th of April. Meanwhile, the 77th Infantry Division assaulted IE Island, a small island off the western end of the peninsula, on the 16th of April. In addition to conventional hazards, the 77th Infantry Division encountered kamikaze attacks, and even local women armed with spears. There was heavy fighting before YE was declared secured on the 21st of April and became another airbase for operations against Japan. Ernie Pyle, a war correspondent, was killed during the fighting on IE Island. southern Okinawa, while the 6th Marine Division cleared northern Okinawa. The U.S. Army 96th Infantry Division and 7th Infantry Division wheeled south across the narrow waist of Okinawa. The 96th Infantry Division began to encounter fierce resistance in west-central Okinawa from Japanese troops holding fortified positions east of Highway No. 1 and about 5 miles northwest of Shuri, from what came to be known as Cactus Ridge. The 7th Infantry Division encountered similarly fierce Japanese opposition from a rocky pinnacle located about 1,000 yards southwest of Arakachi. By the night of the 8th of April, U.S. troops had cleared these and several other strongly fortified positions. They suffered over 1,500 battle casualties in the process, while killing or capturing about 4,500 Japanese, yet the battle had only just begun, for it was now realized they were merely outposts guarding the Shuri line. The next American objective was Kakazu Ridge, 2 hills with a connecting saddle that formed part of Shuri's outer defenses. The Japanese had prepared the positions well and fought tenaciously. The Japanese soldiers hid in fortified caves. The U.S. forces often lost men before clearing the Japanese out from each cave or other hiding place. The Japanese sent Okinawans at gunpoint out to acquire water and supplies for them, which led to civilian casualties. The American advance was inexorable but resulted in a high number of casualties on both sides. As the American assault against Kakazu Ridge stalled, Gen. Ushijima, influenced by Gen. Cho, decided to take the offensive. On the evening of the 12th of April, the 32nd Army attacked U.S. positions across the entire front. The Japanese attack was heavy, sustained, and well organized. After fierce close combat, the attackers retreated, only to repeat their offensive the following night. A final assault on the 14th of April was again repulsed. The effort led 32nd Army's staff to conclude that the Americans were vulnerable to night infiltration tactics, but that the superior firepower made any offensive Japanese troop concentrations extremely dangerous, and they reverted to the defensive strategy. The 27th Infantry Division, which had landed on the 9th of April, took over on the right, along the west coast of Okinawa. General John R. Hodge now had 3 divisions in the line, with the 96th in the middle and the 7th on the east, with each division holding a front of only about 1.5 miles. Hodge launched a new offensive of the 19th of April with a barrage of 324 guns, the largest ever in the Pacific Ocean theater. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers joined the bombardment, which was followed by 650 Navy and Marine planes attacking the enemy positions with napalm, rockets, bombs, and machine guns. The Japanese defenses were sited on reverse slopes, where the defenders waited out the artillery barrage and aerial attack in relative safety, emerging from the caves to rain mortar rounds and grenades upon the Americans advancing up the forward slope. A tank assault to achieve breakthrough by outflanking Kakazu Ridge failed to link up with its infantry support attempting to cross the ridge and failed with the loss of 22 tanks. Although flame tanks cleared many cave defenses, there was no breakthroughs, and 24th Corps suffered 720 casualties. The losses might have been greater, except for the fact that the Japanese had practically all of their infantry reserves tied up farther south, held there by another feint off the Minatoga beaches by the 2nd Marine Division that coincided with the attack. At the end of April, after the Army forces had pushed through the Makinato defensive line, the 1st Marine Division relieved the 27th Infantry Division, and the 77th Infantry Division relieved the 7th. When the 6th Marine Division arrived, 3rd Amphibious Corps took over the right flank and 10th Army assumed control of the battle. On the 4th of May, the 32nd Army launched another counteroffensive. This time, Ushijima attempted to make amphibious assaults on the coasts behind American lines. To support his offensive, the Japanese artillery moved into the open. By doing so, they were able to fire 13,000 rounds in support, but an effective U.S. counter-battery fire destroyed dozens of Japanese artillery pieces. The attack failed. Buckner launched another American attack on the 11th of May. 10 days of fierce fighting followed. On the 13th of May, troops of the 96th Infantry Division and 763rd Tank Battalion captured Conical Hill, rising 476 feet above the Yonabaru coastal plain. This feature was the eastern anchor of the main Japanese defenses and was defended by about 1,000 Japanese. Meanwhile, on the opposite coast, the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions fought for Sugarloaf Hill. The capture of these two key positions exposed the Japanese around Shuri on both sides. Buckner hoped to envelop Shuri and trap the main Japanese defending force. By the end of May, monsoon rains which turned contested hills and roads into a morass exacerbated both the tactical and medical situations. The ground advance began to resemble a World War I battlefield as troops became mired in mud and flooded roads greatly inhibited evacuation of wounded to the rear. Troops lived on a field sodden by rain, part garbage dump and part graveyard. Unburied Japanese and American bodies decayed, sank in the mud, and became part of a noxious stew. Anyone sliding down the greasy slopes could easily find the pockets full of maggots at the end of the journey. On the 29th of May, Marge, Gen. Pedro del Valle, commanding the 1st Marine Division, ordered Captain Julian D. Dusenbury of Company A, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines to capture Shuri Castle. Seizure of the castle represented both strategic and psychological blows for the Japanese and was a milestone in the campaign. Del Valle was awarded a Distinguished Service Medal for his leadership in the fight and the subsequent occupation and reorganization of Okinawa. Captain Dusenbury would later receive the Navy Cross for his actions. Shuri Castle had been shelled by the battleship US Mississippi for 3 days before this advance. Due to this, the 32nd Army withdrew to the south and thus the Marines had an easy task of securing Shuri Castle. The castle, however, was outside the 1st Marine Division's assigned zone and only frantic efforts by the commander and staff of the 77th Infantry Division prevented an American airstrike and artillery bombardment which would have resulted in many casualties due to friendly fire. The Japanese retreat, although harassed by artillery fire, was conducted with great skill at night and aided by the monsoon storms. The 32nd Army was able to move nearly 30,000 men into its last defense line on the Kian Peninsula, which ultimately led to the greatest slaughter on Okinawa in the latter stages of the battle, including the deaths of thousands of civilians. In addition, there were 9,000 IJN troops supported by 1,100 militia, with approximately 4,000 holed up at the underground headquarters on the hillside overlooking the Okinawa Naval Base in the Oroku Peninsula, east of the airfield. On June 4, elements of the 6th Marine Division launched an amphibious assault on the peninsula. The 4,000 Japanese sailors, including Admiral Minoru Ota, all committed suicide within the hand-built tunnels of the underground naval headquarters on the 13th of June. By the 17th of June, the remnants of Ushijima's shattered 32nd Army were pushed into a small pocket in the far south of the island to the southeast of Itomin. On the 18th of June, Gen. Buckner was killed by enemy artillery fire while monitoring the forward progress of his troops. Buckner was replaced by Roy Geiger. Upon assuming command, Geiger became the only U.S. Marine to command a numbered army of the U.S. Army in combat. He was relieved 5 days later by Joseph Stilwell. The last remnants of Japanese resistance fell on the 21st of June, although some Japanese continued hiding, including the future governor of Okinawa Prefecture, Masahide Ushijima, and Cho committed suicide by seppuku in their command headquarters on Hill 89 in the closing hours of the battle. Colonel Yafara had asked Ushijima for permission to commit suicide, but the general refused his request, saying, "If you die, there will be no one left who knows the truth about the Battle of Okinawa. Bear the temporary shame but endure it. This is an order from your army commander." Jafara was the most senior officer to have survived the battle on the island, and he later authored a book titled The Battle for Okinawa. The official surrender ceremony was held on the 7th of September near Kadena Airfield.